All right, let's go ahead and get started. Welcome to week 8. So that means we have this class and then only 2 more face-to-face tutorials. So it goes by very quickly. To give you an update, I've marked all assignments. And I was really impressed. And so I think everyone, there wasn't one that I felt, disappointed, or I thought all of them were quite good. Yeah, so that should be released by the latest Sunday. But what we do is we wait till all of them, the tutorials are finished. The tutors have finished marking. So I'm just waiting for a few more papers to be marked, and then I will release them. But if you look up on there, it'll say that it's marked. Yeah. I'm sure you checked. Yeah. Several times. No one failed. Everyone always thinks they're going to fail. No one's failed. And yeah, so you can congratulate yourself. Everyone's passed. You're fine. And now we're moving on to assessment task 2. How many of you have watched the video? Did you hear the construction in the back? Okay, good, because it was really, at the Peninsula campus, they're doing lots of construction. Yeah. Anyway, so we're going to be talking about speaking. Now, I think that several of you are interested in this topic, particularly how do you not only assess speaking, how do you provide speaking activities, and particularly in classes when you have 50 students. So we're going to talk a little bit more about that. So to get you started, to get you a bit ready, we're going to talk about the lecture by Dak Val that was just the slides. Now, if you haven't had the chance to look at that, that's okay. You can kind of speak about and brainstorm what some of these answers might be. So the first one, what are some of the key components of a speaking lesson? Okay. And that might be from your own experience or from the lesson or from the lecture. And then consider one of the activities presented in that slides and discuss how you have or will use them in your classroom, such as an activity like brainstorming or storytelling or so on. Okay? So just to get us started, go ahead, discuss in your groups. I feel like the energy is a bit low today. Is that correct? Are you feeling a bit tired? No? You're just waiting for Cole's mooncakes. Is that right? Oh, okay. So, all right, go ahead and discuss. Well, I've had this before. Yeah. But
this is like the famous
just finish work. Thank you.
She gave it to me.
Sorry, secretary. Yeah. Oh.
Yeah. Yeah, like I did it like $35. And then I already had one yeah, it's so cool. That's the goal. We need to be like especially for students. That depends on how was your
Yeah, it was too short notice. So I left on a Sunday. I traveled and I got there Monday night. I I presented on Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday, and then Friday, and that night was on playing guitar. So, and then I started it's okay, but I wish I had done it. It was fun going there because you're kind of learning on the way back. But even my body, like I felt
But like we have 14
especially after the last one.
Okay.
I couldn't.
How many groups?
I think
Last time when I was there, like we had that Chinese group tourists. It was so like
But even if it's 5 groups,
they were just stretching on their
But you do
literally doing that.
it's really not like I'm supposed to like
it's like we take it to our context.
but then you're trying to be aware of other people as well.
A bunch of students.
And you find that you're like, doing some kind of weird way.
Yeah, definitely. We need to do separate.
Oh, that was
We have like with different teaching. So we have a separate. So let's make it team.
well, it makes me very
Yeah, of course we can combine still as we wanted to be connected, but also.
How are you?
That's not where in the exam, and school would be less likely to reply these. I mean, like even if I would have because like sex context, like we have like very inclusive languages. We have like 40 or even more students at the time. Yeah, because like 15 minutes. Yeah. Yeah. So I think like we can reach to like all those.
All right, I'm just going to pause the conversation for a minute. I want to ask a little bit. One of the things that I, realized, particularly reading through the lesson plans, is that I think there's a desire to encourage students to speak more. But how do you do this when you have a class of 50 students? Yeah, you can do groups. Another thing, and we'll talk later about it, is something called think, pair, share. Have you heard of that? So the idea that you pose a question, you give a question, you give them like a minute to think about it, then they share with a partner, so pair, and then you just take a few answers. But the nice thing, and this works out really well with children as well, as adults, but children in particular, because I don't know if you watch young children, but if the teacher asks a question, usually, you see like, and like everyone wants to share, right? For example, my child, he's a talker. I don't know where he gets it from, but who knows? But and I remember when he first started school, the teacher said he has to learn to take turns, and he gets, like, he always wants to answer. And so I've stopped calling on him. But what was really interesting is that when he realized that the teacher was never going to call on him, he really just stopped listening. And so it's a really fine line with young children. How do you, if you have a class of 20 or 25 or 50, how do you maximize speaking opportunities, but knowing you can't call on everyone? So maybe just take that idea, discuss for 2 minutes, and then we'll bring it back.
Yeah, because it's Australia.
Yeah, like words or the content. It just really I can like read what I was
All right, what are some of your ideas? It is tricky though. I heard something over here, kind of like the jigsaw where they talk about a question and then they go off to different groups and they talk about it. But it's about maximizing. The other thing is, does anyone in here have children? Just okay. How old are your children?
7 on 2.
Okay. Do either one of your children do swimming lessons?
No.
Okay. So I'll give this. My children do swimming lessons, and one of the things that I find really interesting is that they're in a different class now, but there was this one class and there were 5 children. Okay. And they would stand on the side and the teacher would stand over their side and they would say, okay, each child would come over and then go back, and then the second child, okay, come, whatever. Third. And I was thinking about it and I thought, okay, I pay for a half an hour, I pay for a half an hour of swimming, but I think my child only swims for maybe 7 minutes. Right? And so it's thinking about how do you maximize. And it's hard as a teacher because you're trying to help each child. But how do you maximize so that parents go, oh, that was a great 7 minutes that I paid for. Or they say, actually, my child was learning swimming for the whole time. So in some ways that goes back to, language teaching. How do we, not just speaking, but also how do we engage students? And now, it can be listening, it can be other things, but how do we particularly maximize speaking? And by doing things like think, pair, share, doing groups, does encourage that. Because you can have a question, and you can ask 7 people the question, but you're engaging 7 people, and maybe engaging 4 or 5 other students who may be listening. But if you make them all do 1 minute or 2 minutes of sharing together, all students have had some opportunity to speak. So it's just thinking about things like that. How do you maximize that? Because a lot of times as teachers, we feel like we have to observe it and correct it. But if we only do that, then we miss opportunities to just allow students to actually use the language. So just something to think about. All right. Now, has anybody ever heard about this? Find someone who? Okay. Now, I'm going to give you one of these. You need to find someone who has done the following things and then write their name. And they write their name in the box. I missed one, sorry. Max is obviously not my choice.
Yeah.
And then you go around and you can follow
It's like week 8. Well, this is like week 1.
Getting you to speak to each other.
Okay.
I'm giving you ideas of speaking.
No.
I know.
Let's go around. So, are you conversing with each other? Oh, I do speak. Well, I mean, like, I could do well. the definitions because like I did teach like private students. Yeah, but that's not fun actually.
You can move around. You can move around.
Can I just put my name? Hi, do you want to do everything? I do. And I wish I'm sleeping right now. Yeah. What about you guys? Oh, right. Oh my God. You should have told us that. Do it. No, I just went free. Which one suits you? Besides this one. I don't want to put more than one person in the box. Wow, impressive. Goodbye. You guys know shy. Just put my name in all of the box. Except the tree.
you were heading to? No? All right, go ahead and have a seat. Now that you just really got into it. All right. I tried to purposely not give many instructions just to see what happens. But what rules or instructions should be given to students beforehand? I think because some of you recognize this activity. One would be like, can one person just put their name on all of the things? But if you gave this particularly to younger children, they most likely would just put, one or two people's names. What other things would you need to know? Or
just speaking English.
Yeah.
One person, right, per category.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. What about if you wanted to use this for questions? For example, it's written has eaten dinner already. Helping them understand how would you put that into a question. So have you eaten dinner already? So where you might actually look at the structures first and talk about the difference. Or, this sort of thing is I remember teaching, so I'm going to do this for you. Just be like, and so what skill is being learned here is reading. Just kind of like, you read this, I'm not going to say anything to you. You understand what you need to do, and then I'll say that. How do you think EAL students or EFL students might respond to an activity like this? They enjoy it? It's a bit slow. Even it's quite funny, observing because everyone always just sits at the table, and it's kind of like, we have to do this activity. And this table was like, why are we doing this now? We already know each other. And one thing, and that's another important thing, is one of the things I do try to do, and I was trying to just kind of give you this activity, but I do try to make sure I tell people why we're doing something. And I didn't tell you why we're doing it. Because this wasn't really, the purpose wasn't to use it as an icebreaker, because you probably do know each other a little bit. Though I don't think you knew all of those things, right? By the way, is there anyone who does like to read grammar rules? There's usually one. There's usually one in the class that just kind of gets a little excited. But the idea is to kind of look at things that we could do in our classes as speaking activities. What language skill or practice in this activity? Writing and even dictating. Like if you said, one of the rules was that you have to write their name. You'd have to ask them to spell it and phonics in there. Okay. Could you use this in one of your classrooms, particularly if it was a big class?
It's very popular when you are, for example, trying a grammar concept, okay, present perfect, right? Not telling them that they are studying present perfect, but you put questions like the first one, has eaten, for example, have you ever visited, so like anything like that, way to practice the instruction.
And exactly, and so this is actually, usually students think that it's just kind of fun, but it can be quite educative. It can be very good for teaching certain things. All right, so that's just to kind of get us started. I want to talk a little bit about communication with our students. One of the things that I often tell, particularly teachers who have students who speak another language is wait time. Now, most of you, because you speak another language, you understand this. That sometimes when particularly when you're first learning a language, someone says something and you think about it and you translate it, and then you're ready to respond. But what happens, particularly in Australian classrooms, is that if you've ever been in an Australian classroom, it's like there's a lot going on. I think you were just were you talking about this? And there's kind of this, there's always this rush. It feels like there's always a rush. We got to get through the curriculum. We have to do through this. And it's often in a hurry. So to be like, does anyone have, any ideas? All right, well, and it's moving on. Or that idea, you have a student who isn't very confident in the language, and you ask them a question, and you just ask it right away. And then they think. And that's why little things like think, pair, share, where you say, okay, just take a minute, think about it. Talk with someone else before they have to publicly talk. Using the whiteboard or smartboard or any kind of visuals and signals is really important. To be able to use English, but and especially for writing things so that they hear and they see the letter. So that's the letter sound, correspondence. Think, pair, share. That idea of jigsaws or cooperative learning. So together you work on something, then you go into different groups and you come back to your home group. Again, I've used please, fish, trade. These are different ways to kind of get students communicating as much as you can in the classroom. Can anyone add to that? Any ideas or thoughts you'd like to share? Something that's worked?
Yeah, what do you write first, even before?
Yeah, and again, that's a way to kind of get them thinking about it in English. Think about what they want to say, how they want to say it, and so it gives them confidence. This is probably a good opportunity because Alda's here. I was learning Spanish. I don't think I've told you the story, but one of the things I did, I think I was like 20, and I went to Chile, and you're Chilean, right? Yeah. And I stayed with a family who didn't speak any English, and because I wanted to learn Spanish. And I stayed with them, and there's like these little, and now I don't even know the words for it, but just like these little shops. And they'd be like everywhere. And so there was a man who said, well, one way you can, and he was also American, and he said, one way you can learn Spanish is if you write, like you introduce yourself and you write it all down and you try to write it in Spanish, then you have someone, like a friend, say it in Spanish on a recorder, and you listen to it and you practice. And then you go and you make friends with like 10 of these little shops. You go around, hello, my name is Melissa. I'm from the United States, and I have 2 brothers, and I do this. And it's quite funny, but like it really did help my Spanish. And it actually allowed me to be a part of the community. So all the shop people knew me. And sometimes I got in really like big trouble with some of the words. I'll tell you, I'll probably embarrass Aldo by saying this, but some of my friends that I made, they were laughing so much because like photo, okay, in English, PH, and OTO, and so I don't know what I was thinking, and photo is photo in Spanish, right? And you know exactly what we're gonna do. And somehow I don't know what I was doing, and I said something about, do you want to see my photo or something like that? And it's kind of close to like my behind. So all the time, so my friends would make fun of me, and like when I meet someone, they'd be like, okay, just listen, be careful because she'll show you her behind. And it was a really embarrassing thing, but I was trying to, like, this is where translation happens and it's really bad. But the whole point of that, I didn't know where I was going on with that, but the whole point is, yes, I agree that writing it down is a good idea. Careful what you say, but writing it down is a very good idea. And, you know, it just allows that time to kind of practice and master it. All right, no more stories for me. Okay, one other really embarrassing one, which is really funny. Again, kind of, it's always about body parts. Does anyone here, I don't think anyone speaks Vietnamese in here, no? No? Vietnamese? No. So I was in Vietnam, and I was learning, and I went to this restaurant, it was a chicken restaurant, and I was with some other people, and they said, they wanted chicken breast, which you know that most, like in most probably Chinese places too, that's like, it's not the nice part of the chicken. And so they always go, why do you want that? You want the leg or something like that. But the people there always said, we really want chicken breast. And so I was trying to say it, and I think I said, I tried to say chicken breast, but like I think there's a different word for chicken breast, and then like, and the guy was like, we don't, because it got really confusing, and I was mortified. And so, but then they thought it was funny. So whenever they'd see me, they would be like, "Hello, breast woman." So this is where I become really part of the community. Is basically saying wrong and inappropriate things in the language. So, all right. On that note, we're going to discuss. So, what makes a good speaker of English? How do they interact? Is this mechanics, functions? Okay, so we talk about language in regards to like linguistics and mechanics, but also functions. Okay, so it's fine if you know the grammar rules, but can you actually use it for the appropriate functions of language? Social cultural rules and norms. And this is where there's lots of different times where you might say the right thing, but it's not socially or culturally appropriate. Okay. What strategies do you use to encourage EAL students to speak in class? Okay. So what do you use? How do you assess students speaking? And this can be quite hard too, because if you have a large class, how do you go around, and what if they're not speaking? This is actually something that came up with university students. In some classes, they actually have to assess participation. And there were international students who said, I'm really worried about that, because how does the tutor know? Like, and what if we're not really discussing something important when he comes to my table, or maybe it's not my turn to speak, or and there was a lot of fear around that, thinking like, how do you judge whether I've done well and participated in the case that when you were actually walking past my table, I wasn't talking because I just talked before you came, but I just finished what I said. So this is where it can be hard, because if you're monitoring, it's not like you're going to always catch everything that the students are saying and be able to assess automatically. What are the common issues that occur in the classroom in regards to speaking and listening? So what are the issues around speaking and listening that you have observed, either as a student or as a teacher? Okay, so go ahead and discuss some of these things in your groups.
Yeah, so basically, I would agree with the very question. Speaking English the way they speak Chinese, that's the most spontaneous way to understand. Because although there might be some logic difference between two accents, but if you can just have some because that's a thing that's a linguistic thing. That's like how you do interpersonal relationships.
How you should have like absurdity and in this context is generalization. Like how you assist students. Especially when I think like
because that's like one thing they look big and guys about like actually just because yeah, not
oh, when I was teaching, we have district policy. Like it's so good. I'm so happy.
they're not allowed to speak any Chinese or any dialect in class. Let's have to speak English. So if you want to speak Chinese, you have to ask teacher. Yeah. No, you have like ask teachers. So if the teachers approve otherwise you just have to speak English. You can try everything. It doesn't have to be like 100% correct or phonetically correct. It just you have to speak English, but like otherwise the teacher, if she wanted to explain something, they would also like ask students if they can speak Chinese. But also, I think if you could be like, so that's kind of like a base, like a solid foundation. You have to do it at the very beginning. Yeah, also, like, if they don't speak unless you just have like a very positive, you can have like gestures, like, I don't know, you have to get involved, but you don't have to exactly speak. Because like when they're doing like the group works, you just walk along and just listen to it and if it's a job, just keep it to yourself. Because that was the class they have a very strong relationship since first grade. They know each other's style. Yeah. So kind of obedient to the teacher. We don't have to speak like very difficult. Very simple. Like,
All right, we're going to move on because there's quite a few activities that we have. But I want to talk a little bit, we're kind of talking about speaking, how to go about speaking, but also evaluating speaking or assessing. Now, there are lots of ways to assess student speaking. For example, you can assess student speaking through turn taking. You know, can students have a conversation and take appropriate turns? Or invite them into conversation? That in itself is a skill, an important skill of a good speaker. Obviously, there's linguistic features or fluency. So to say that we're assessing students speaking, we actually need to know exactly what we are assessing. And we may assess certain things for certain times. So if you're looking at how they use certain questions, how they ask questions and the linguistic form, that's maybe what you're looking at, not so much fluency. Now, you can take notes while they work in groups, but it can be difficult to keep all this information. But thinking about how many times did the student respond? How many times did students initiate the conversation? What did the student do when there was a communication breakdown? I think that's a really key thing about communication breakdowns, is that happens, like where something, there's a miscommunication. But it's how the student or how the person recovers from it that's really telling about their confidence. I think this is kind of true with, so even if you look at a child reading their first language, okay? And I know one of the things that I find really hard, and Aldo, maybe you do as well because you have a 7-year-old, but if they're reading and they say the wrong word, I have the desire to want to correct them right away. Like, no, that's not. But the teacher in me knows that I just wait and I allow them to kind of keep going and they go, oh wait, that doesn't make sense. I'm going to read it again, and then they say the word right, correctly. But if I was correcting them right away, they wouldn't have actually self-corrected. But most students will or can self-correct. But as parents and as teachers, sometimes we jump in, not allowing them to actually recover from a communication breakdown. And that's the learning that actually occurs when they go, okay, oh, this is how I get over it. So just a little thing to think about. Self-assessment checklist. I quite like, and I think you probably know this, I like a self-assessment checklist, getting students to really, and part of it's them taking ownership of where they're at in their learning. So I can do this, I can do this, I can do this, I can't do this. Not this. And getting them to see where they're at. Now, most of the time, with this kind of thing, usually it's quite accurate. Actually, there was a study done, it was in nursing, because I was talking with one of the lecturers there. And they did this with their nursing students. And they had some kind of assignment or test. I guess no, it was an assignment, it wasn't a test. An assignment. And they had it externally marked by not people in the course. And then they had the students self-assess. And they found that probably 90% of the self-assessed were the same as the actual assessed. So that people were quite close about understanding where they were at. And the ones that were kind of on the outside were either, usually it tended to be, in their case, Australian students who would give themselves a higher score because they said, well, if I'm self-assessing, I might as well give myself a better mark. So again, this was just like a handful. There wasn't a lot of students who did this. And then, interestingly, international students who were like, nothing I do is good. So it surely could not be more than, like I said no one failed, and oh, phew. As if people were worried that they were going to fail. And I think we assume the worst. And so on. But in general, people can do a relatively good job of assessing where they're at. I think with speaking, you can have informal to more formal interviews as well. You know, you can get an idea of someone's ability quite quickly. When I was living in Vietnam, I worked at an international school, and it was the United Nations International School, so you could only have 10% of one nationality in the school. And so it was quite diverse. But I would assess students into the EAL program. And one of the things I would have them do like a writing, usually it was like pictures, and they just had to look at the pictures and then write the sequence of the pictures, what was happening. And that told me a lot about how, you know, their language ability. And then I would just have a simple conversation. And I can kind of gauge just from an informal conversation, their confidence in what kinds of things, like the words that they were using, whether they would take risks or not, and so on. All right. So we're going to do a little student-to-student guided interview. All right. So this is kind of IELTS-like a little bit. Yeah. Okay. So you're going to work in a group of 3 or 4, okay, which works out well for these tables. You might split up into smaller groups in the bigger tables. Now you're going to have one person who's going to interview, one person who will be interviewed for the student, and another person who will keep time, and then the 4th person can just observe if you're in a group of 4. Yeah. So one person will interview, so looking confused, so let's say you will interview, you don't have to do this, interview, you are going to be interviewed, you're going to keep time, and you're just going to watch. Okay? Now, and the person that's watching is thinking about how would I assess it? Okay, think about that. How would I assess it? So what will happen is the interviewer is going to ask some questions, and the idea is that they have to keep the interview going for at least 2 minutes, so the time tracker. And the interviewer needs to have 2 follow-up questions during the interview. So actually, the people being assessed are both of them, right? And they have 1 minute to prepare questions. Okay? So before I go to the next page that gives those questions, I want you at your tables to decide who is going to be the pair that interviews and is interviewed. Okay? Well, I'll give you the prompt in a minute. You first just have to identify who's going to do that, because you only have 1 minute to prepare if you are part of the assessed work. Okay? So find out who's going to be the pair that does the activity. You can nominate other people. Okay, do you know? Do you know who's doing it? Okay, do you know who's being interviewed and who's interviewing? Okay, 2 people. Just choose 2 people. Okay, 2 people in each group. Okay, now there's 1 minute. 1 minute. So the interviewee has to come up. These are the prompts. You have to ask questions. They're going to have to answer.
And we have like 2 follow-ups for each person.
Yeah. Well, in general.
That's a weird
No, just 2 people. Who's doing it? Asking 2 groups or you can be just.
Yeah, ask yeah, and you're gonna observe what
Once you know, the timekeeper will give the 1 minute and then the 2 minutes for the interview. Okay?
because the scenario is great. Hi. Polishing. So I really like to do a lot of, like I said, I do like to adding some kind of stuff so we can
All right. Now, a couple of things to think about. I want you to now discuss as a group, how would you assess the partner's performance? Like how would you assess both pair, actually the pair in general? So what do you need to focus on? Is it fluency, is it accuracy, self-correcting, language repairs, turn-taking? Would you use, and we're going to talk about this, a holistic or an analytic rubric? What are the benefits and drawbacks for each? We will discuss this. If you were going to use a rubric, what would it look like? How about you use either peer or self-evaluation? And how about we take the student-to-student interview and make it a teacher-student interview? Now, the benefit of having a student-to-student interview is primarily just logistics, because raise your hand if you have done any speaking interviews with your students as part of your class. Anyone?
What kind of interviews?
Yeah, just like teacher to student.
Oh, yeah.
They take a long time
Yeah.
because it's like one student at a time. So this way you can involve two students and they talk to one another. So it's just one way to try to maximize time by doing a paired interview. So they're actually, and that's why you would give them, like each partner, and what you would do is you'd have like cards, and explaining the task, you will have, 1 minute to prepare, they flip over, they can write down like you did. You probably want to model this in class beforehand so they know, because it is a bit hard to get your head around. Everyone's like, what am I supposed to do? But doing that and preparing allows them to, and then after that 2 minutes, then they would basically, the other partner would have other questions that they would then try. So both of them get an opportunity to ask and answer questions. So I'll leave you with these questions to discuss, but the key here is how would you assess this?
Be free.
Specific, because I don't know what I'm interviewing. What am I looking at? Okay. Oh, so it's not like sort of job, because that would be one of the questions.
And then she gave me like really different questions. Yeah, especially
That's what I thought.
I think she has like a certain although like she thinks that you should answer it that way. So she can lead me to an answer. I just don't think so. Yeah, I just don't think so. Yeah, the braver.
No, I'm not calm. I'm not calm at all. Yeah. And I'm just there's yeah, I know. That's one thing that
What I did, like last one I took and small. I was like,
and then specific. Is that kind of interesting?
I want to shake and then everybody stands behind
Yeah, but like they would find it excessive if we like kind of I don't think that
All right. Now I've given you a variety of rubrics to have a look. Now these are all online. But I want you to think about these rubrics. Look at the rubrics. Which do you like most and why?
Well, then maybe that's kind of subjective. Yeah, I know. That's what I was thinking because even like so we have to get a good grade. Especially like when you cover a specific topic that kind of appeals to and if you have like very good pronunciation, fluency, and like that, make you sound like a native speaker. At least the mindset that oh yeah, yeah.
Okay, I'm going to share with you something called Tools to Enhance Assessment Literacy, called TEAL. Has anybody ever heard of this? This has been created by the Department of Education here in Victoria, and it's a whole bunch of, it provides a lot of different assessment tools for English as an additional language. Now, I've given you an example, so I've handed some out for your group. Don't worry about the rubrics yet. Don't worry about the rubric yet, because actually I have a problem with the rubric. But look at the task. Now I've just given a few, but it's a picture task, so it looks like this. This is what you would give students, okay? And they have to tell the story using cards, these cards. Now this could be, this is an oral language one, but it could also probably be a written one as well. So I want you to consider how you might use this in your classroom. What would you modify? Any potential challenges or constraints? And then brainstorm what type of story you might create using this task. And use the rubric to help you consider what might be considered when assessing how students complete this task. Okay. All right. Have a look. Now, I will make my comment on the rubric. I think the rubric has way too much on it. I did give them feedback that I think it's really way too much. But that's where, as a teacher, you would decide, you pick from the rubric, decide what you would actually assess.
Oh yeah. We can just have a couple of words. This is from the student.
I guess they'd have to identify the yeah.
Because they were like tell stories.
Oh, is this a group speaking? I like it. I like it.
Keep the floor to the but she saw that just before I love this picture. Didn't expect
If I was a teacher, I would have just assessed the case of your presence. Very hard to just if you try, if I can see you
All right. So a very creative way to look at it. So this group over here actually used the story, and like each person had to talk about the picture. So they did it like a collaborative oral story. So that was, yeah, you're getting a lot of nods, going, very good, very good. But that would be a good way to include a group and get maximum speaking time, and also be able to sit as a teacher at a group and say, okay, give them some time, and then, or not, if you want it more spontaneous, and then sit down, take notes as they do it. So, all right. Now, what I'd like to do, this is our last activity, and then we'll just briefly talk about, actually what I'll do first is we're going to briefly talk about assessment task 2. And then we'll come back to the last task. So the last task you can then put up on the discussion forum if you like. Now, I know we're losing energy on the discussion forum, and that's okay. Like they're not assessed. But yes, so if you get time, you get time. Okay, I'll come back to this one. So I'm just going to go over what I already said in the video. I think the biggest thing that you need to do is once you've identified your topic from that list on Moodle, is to identify the key parts of the topic. So, because some of the topics, I didn't create these topics. Some of the topics are very compact with a lot of ideas, okay? So I took this, for example, the spread of English as a global language and its implications in classroom teaching. There's actually quite a lot in that. And actually, if you read the task, no matter which topic you do, you have to talk about the implications on classroom teaching. So that's just already a part of it anyway. So the spread and global English as a global language. So if I was going to be using, if this was my topic, I probably want to give a background about the history of the spread of English, okay? But particularly in your country. So what's been the impact? What do we know? Particularly what I call empirical evidence. So things like studies that have run research that have looked at this. What is the impact now? So what's the history? What's the impact now? How is English used? How has the spread of English impacted education? So a lot of you in your lesson plans talked about how kind of the rise of English has impacted, now with national exams, the curriculum. So how has the spread of English actually impacted how people view English, education system, so on? And how has it impacted teaching? Or has it? Or maybe it's not. Okay. So there's a lot of different things that you could explore there. Another one is the development of speaking skills. So how does one develop their speaking skills? What is the characteristics of a competent speaker? What are the components of a speaking skill, like communicative competence? How is speaking developed, taught, learned in your country? How does this impact today's classroom and the future classroom? So you might take a few key points, but remember, this is also an argument. This is an essay. So you need to, so your argument for the first one might be something like the spread of English in Japan. I know that was in here from Japan, but let's just say in Japan has had a very strong impact on education. And then maybe you look at its impact on curriculum and its impact on assessment and its impact on general policy. I don't know, maybe that's how you structure it. So the key thing is thinking about a structure. Okay. I'll give a few more ideas here. So I haven't used one of the topics, I've just used a random one, like a positive learning environment. And so the first section of the essay needs to be about kind of the theory. So we're talking about positive learning environments. So again, I'm going to have an essay about positive learning environments. So I might be arguing, that positive learning environments are important to support EAL students in Australia. Okay? And I'm going to maybe talk about what we know about positive learning environments overall. What do we know about it in Australia? Maybe I'll look at some key things. Maybe because positive learning environment, there's been studies about how positive learning environments improves achievement, various things like this. Okay, so that's going to be my essay. Now then there's the second part, which is the reflection, which is only a small part. Now again, I didn't originally design this assessment task, and the reflection is a bit funny. Like it's kind of something you just have to do. So thinking about, because I remember last year when I taught that, students were like, well, it doesn't really connect. It's not a huge amount of points, okay? And I know that. So just know that I know it's a bit funny, okay? But there were some, questions that you talked about, like what you wanted to learn. So was this something that you had said that you needed to develop? So maybe you're doing something, maybe you want to do listening, and you didn't say anything about listening, okay? So you might put in a reflection, it was through the reading and through the, the tutorials that I became really interested in listening. So while I didn't actually identify this in the first few weeks, I realize now how important it is. Okay, so there's ways about reflecting and not reflecting. It's just, so know that this is just you have to tick this box. Okay.
So in the part do I need to support, justify with evidence?
Yeah, like a little, you can say, you don't have to quote yourself, but you can say, in my reflection, I said, this you can paraphrase or you can quote it. It's not really big, but I'm not going to go check. I'll be honest. Yeah, I'm going to check it. How does your new learning about, if your topic is listening, help you achieve what you wanted out of this course? Because you talked about what you wanted to get out of this course. So can you connect it at all? Now that you've learned all this information about the spread of English in your country, has this helped you get what you wanted out of this course? If it doesn't, then don't mention it. And how does this new learning change your perception of your role as a teacher? Because you talked about what you thought your role as a teacher is. And has that changed at all? Maybe it's still the same, but it's broadened a bit. Okay. So this is not going to be a big section. Don't spend too much time on this. It is really just, you have to take this box. Okay? Because, do you know why? I think there is some kind of objective or course outcome that says that you need to reflect on your learning. So this would have, that's why it's been put in the assessment task. All right.
Some words in that part.
I wouldn't, I mean, I'd say, so what did you say?
4,000.
Yeah, 4,000. I would suggest not 4,000. Now, I mean, like a paragraph of like, 3 to 4 sentences. 3 to 4 sentences. I mean, if you need the word count, you could go more, but don't waste it on this. Okay? And then there's the practical side of it. And there's some questions on Moodle. So if I'm talking about my positive learning, how do I actually create positive learning environments to improve learning experience of my EL learners? So this is, now that I know what I know about the topic, okay, how does this actually going to influence my teaching? So think about strategies or activities. Now I would just focus on 3, you'll find, and that was a question asked of like, is it 50, like, do you put 2,000 words on theory, 2,000 on practice? No, your theory will probably be much bigger, and that's okay. But you just have to have 3 activities. And I would do less activities with more detail than more activities with less detail. So I would just focus on 3 and why you're using them. So, I might do some kind of, didn't really think this through, an activity where they write letters to each other and they talk about what they like about each other, something like that. And I explain that that's not only improving their writing, but it's allowing them to, support their peers. I don't know. Okay. So, and you explain that. So what your activity is, not right now, but maybe for your homework, we have homework, is I want you to start thinking about an outline. And if possible, you will feel better if in week 10, I can see it and I can go, yeah, you're on the right track. So if you have an outline, I will check it. So that's in your best interest to get some feedback. So have the goal to get your outline completed. Now you can send me an email as well. If you're really excited about getting on your assignment and you want to, finish it before week 10, you can email me and I can give you feedback. Okay. All right. Now, off to the final, and then I'm going to let you go at 7:45 because technically I'm supposed to. Oh, what am I doing? I don't know. See, obviously I'm getting tired here. So this is the last activity for today. Now I'm not going to assign you one of these tasks, but if you go to Teal, this website, as a group, as a table group, I want you to choose one of the speaking or oral Teal tasks, not 8 because we've already done that. And I want you to explain the task and then evaluate the task using, there's a folder online that gives you some evaluation. So I want you to evaluate the task and explain it and then stick it in the discussion forum and then you're finished. Okay, so as a group, go to this website, choose a task, explain it and evaluate it using the discussion post, but as a group. So you'll do a group post. Kind of like what we did the first week. So if you go to, actually I'll show you because the website's actually a little bit confusing. So if you go here, and you go to assessment tools, and then you go to common oral assessment tool. So again, assessment tools, common oral assessment tool. And then if you go down, and then you go to oral assessment tasks and criteria. And then you'll have 21 to choose from. But we've already done the picture sequence. So your group can choose one, and then on the discussion forum for week 8, you can explain it and evaluate it as a task for your teaching context. Okay, so again, assessment tools. How is week 6? That's what I wanted to hear.
What are we going to do now?
You're going to go on to discussion, so you're going to explain it and evaluate it. What do you think of that task? Okay, so what I want to do is one, and then on the discussion, do a good group discussion. All you need to do is say which task it is, explain what task it is, and evaluate it. So what do you think about it? Sorry, because that was on the other slide. I stepped this up so no one knows. I'll put that slide back up. There is a spreadsheet online that you can use to evaluate, but you don't really need it. Just evaluate your general comments about whether you think you really use it in one of your classes. So when you put it on the discussion forum, make sure to say which task it is, which number, explain the task, and then give information about whether you like your evaluation, whether you think it's a good task for your context or not.
Like we have to Yeah, it's really
So that's primary. So A and then the way that it works. So yeah, I don't know mine. The A is for that year 2. So there's A1 and A2. So there's 1 and 2. Then once they get to year 3, they're on the B level. So year 3 to 6 is BL to B2. SL, which is SL is like they don't have a language background in their no, but also they don't have language background in their first language. So like some refugees that have been traveling down actually just in their language as well. Like they can speak it, but they can't. All right, I think you're finishing up here, but I just want to check to see, obviously I'm here for questions after, but how are we traveling? How are we feeling? Are we good? Feel like we know what we need to do? Are you excited about assessment task 2? Yeah. So do let me know how things are going. It always is a bit hard in the middle, and people lose a bit of steam, and then people start stressing out a little bit. But do keep in contact. Let me know how things are going. But hopefully you get some time to look at Teal. Some people have looked at there's actually, if you look down, there's like videos and a whole bunch of other things. So Teal is quite a good resource to have if you need some ideas. So you might spend some time looking at that at your own time. All right. Any general questions? Nobody ever has them because they always ask them later. But I'll still ask generally. But other than that, go ahead and finish up your discussions if you'd like to. And otherwise, you're free to go. And I will see you in week 10. But remember, it's not in 2 weeks. It's in 3 weeks. Because we have the mid-semester break.
Oh, okay.
Is that right? Yeah. Well, it's still called week 10. We just skipped it. The 9th. And then you kind of give
Anyway, I think it's around okay. You mean second one? It's a separate, and I think it's like it's two perspectives from takes up. So that the first one is one is for like it's more like essays. Oh, be careful with her. Don't introduce yourself. I think like you need to like yeah, and you have to pay for your service. If you want, if you want to attend graduation therapy, so you need to pay for it. Yeah, but I'm thinking about the course transfer because I want to transfer some master in education and the general stream because I need to take the exam. How are you feeling? So I can apply for PhD. I just decided. I just made up my mind.
is talking a lot. I thought, oh, like I was doing that, but I didn't know why I was doing it or really just now I appreciate it.
I'm conscious with my, I have no idea.
Very clear.
Just that. Yeah, no, just the, yeah, your explanation of the task and the evaluation. You can do it as a group and then that's discussion. No, I mean, a little bit, it's up to you. If you want to put extra work into it, but again, this is based on I know you're very conscious of doing the right thing. Everything okay? Yeah, feeling okay?
So this